imagine. I excused myself to the bathroom, counted to 60, and returned with the same pleasant expression. Let them enjoy their superiority for exactly one more day. Tomorrow, I would arrive at their doorstep with a stack of papers that would change everything. Tomorrow, they would learn that the house they'd been living in, the same house they'd kicked me out of at 18, now belonged to me. And they had exactly 60 days to pack their designer clothes and leave. If this is your first time on our channel, what you're about to hear is a true story of patience, pain, and the kind of justice that takes years to unfold. I don't share this for sympathy or validation, but because I know some of you are where I once was, underestimated and overlooked. Stay until the end, because the moment I handed them those eviction papers was just the beginning of a reckoning none of us were prepared for. And if you're enjoying this, please consider subscribing. It helps more than you know. My name is Avalora, and until 3 weeks ago, I was the family charity case. The niece whose parents died in a sailing accident when I was 8, leaving me with nothing but photographs and grief. My Aunt Marceline and Uncle Dominic took me in, a fact they reminded me of at every opportunity. We opened our home to you, they'd say, usually after asking me to babysit their children or help with housework while my cousins enjoyed their weekends. I wasn't naturally quiet. Before my parents died, teachers described me as intellectually curious and socially confident, but grief and subtle emotional degradation can transform a child. In my aunt and uncle's household, I learned to minimize myself, to speak softly, to need less, to expect nothing. The differences in how they treated their biological children versus me weren't dramatic enough to report nothing that would interest social services. My cousins Phoebe and Winston received new clothes. I got hand-me-downs. They attended tennis lessons and science camps. I was told these activities were extras the family couldn't afford for me. They received allowances. I was told I should be grateful for room and board. I watched my aunt track every expense related to me in a small notebook she kept in her desk drawer. One day, when I was 14, I found it while looking for a stapler. Inside, columns of numbers detailed the financial burden I represented. $42.18 for school supplies. $127.65 for a dentist appointment. $83.22 for a winter coat. The final page included a running total, $38,496.73. That night, I sat on my bed, the twin mattress in the converted storage room off the kitchen, and made a promise to myself. Someday, I would pay back every penny. Someday, I would be financially independent enough that they could never again make me feel like an obligation. When I turned 18, my aunt and uncle suggested I find more affordable living arrangements. It wasn't a surprise. They'd been hinting at it for months. "You're an adult now," Uncle Dominic said, hands folded on the dining table. "It's time you experienced real independence." Translation: get out. I found a studio apartment with water damage and unreliable heating. I worked 3 jobs, morning shifts at a coffee shop, evening shifts at a bookstore, and weekend hours at a tech repair shop. The repair shop became my education. The owner, Renata, noticed my interest in the business side of things and began teaching me basic coding and database management during slow periods. While my cousins attended prestigious universities, their graduation photos prominently displayed in my aunt and uncle's living room, I took night classes at community college, computer science, business management, accounting. I learned to function on 5 hours of sleep and discount store coffee. Every family gathering became an exercise in endurance. Still at that entry-level position? Uncle Dominic would ask, not waiting for my answer before launching into Winston's latest promotion or Phoebe's new condo purchase. I'd nod and smile, congratulating my cousins while they barely acknowledged my existence. What they didn't know, what none of them bothered to ask about, was that during those years, I was building something. It started small, a software program that helped small businesses manage inventory more efficiently than expensive enterprise solutions. I coded in my apartment after work, using a second-hand laptop with a cracked screen. Renata became my first client, then referred me to other local business owners. By 26, I had 5 employees working remotely and a client list that stretched across 3 states. By 29, I had patented 3 software innovations and expanded into cybersecurity solutions for mid-sized companies. By 31, I had quietly amassed more wealth than my aunt and uncle had seen in their lives. But I kept renting that small apartment. I drove a reliable but unimpressive car. I wore simple, quality clothes without designer labels. Not from financial necessity, but from a desire to remain underestimated. There's a certain power in being overlooked. People reveal themselves when they think you pose no threat to their status. And reveal themselves they did. At every holiday dinner, every birthday celebration, every family reunion, I collected their dismissive comments and condescending advice like diamonds. Each one hardened my resolve. 6 months ago, something interesting landed in my inbox. One of my clients, a real estate investment firm, was selling off certain properties in their portfolio. Among them was a familiar address, the house where I'd spent my teenage years, my aunt and uncle's house. I could have ignored this information. I could have wished them well and moved on with my life. But 2 decades of small cruelties don't fade easily. I made some discreet inquiries. The investment firm had purchased their mortgage from the original lender years ago. My aunt and uncle had refinanced multiple times, taking out equity to fund renovations and Phoebe's wedding and Winston's graduate school. They had missed payments, negotiated extensions, and were perilously close to foreclosure, all while maintaining the appearance of financial stability. The gap between their reality and their facade fascinated me. They'd spent years making me feel inadequate while standing on financial quicksand themselves. I formed an LLC, secured financing based on my now considerable assets, and purchased their mortgage at a surprisingly reasonable price. The investment firm was eager to unload properties in that aging neighborhood. The paperwork was completed quietly, without my name ever appearing in the documents. For 3 weeks, I waited. I watched them host another extravagant garden party they couldn't afford. I observed from social media as they took another luxury vacation while behind on their mortgage payments. I listened to them plan the family reunion where they would, once again, remind everyone of my financial failings. The day after the reunion, I arrived at their door with my real estate attorney and a stack of papers. My uncle answered, surprise flickering across his face at my unexpected visit. Avalora? What are you doing here? I need to speak with everyone, please. He hesitated, then ushered me into the living room where my aunt and cousins were finishing Sunday brunch. The remnants of eggs, Benedict, and mimosas cluttered the table I'd wiped clean so many times as a teenager. What's this about? My aunt asked, not bothering to stand. I placed the stack of papers on the table between us. This is an eviction notice. You have 60 days to vacate the premises. Confusion, then disbelief, then outrage flashed across their faces in rapid succession. What nonsense is this? Uncle Dominic snatched up the papers. 3 weeks ago, I purchased your mortgage from Crescent Investment Group. You're 4 months behind on payments, which constitutes default under the terms of your agreement. I'm exercising my right to terminate your occupancy. The silence was absolute. Winston dropped his fork. Phoebe's mouth opened and closed without sound. My aunt's fingers gripped her napkin until her knuckles whitened. This is our house, my uncle finally stammered. Actually, it's mine now. Has been for 3 weeks. You can't do this, my aunt whispered, her voice suddenly small. We're family. The word family hung between us, loaded with 2 decades of contradictions. Family. The same justification they'd used when asking me to give up my bedroom for guests. When explaining why there wasn't money for my school trip while they renovated their master bathroom. When suggesting I find somewhere else to live at 18. This is business, I replied, echoing words my uncle had used so many times. You're welcome to apply for a new rental agreement, but the rates will reflect current market value, about 60% higher than you're paying now. I stood to leave, placing my business card on the table. My contact information, should you have questions about the eviction process. My cousin Winston, who had always been kinder than the others, looked up with genuine distress. Where are we supposed to go? I paused at the door. the weight of 20 years pressing on my chest. I hear there's an affordable apartment complex across town. The units are small, but they're a good place to start over. I would know. It's where I built my first million. If you're still with me at this point in the story, I appreciate your attention. Sometimes justice takes years to arrive, and what happened next surprised even me. The eviction notice was just the beginning. What unfolded over the next 60 days would reveal family secrets none of us were prepared to face. If you're finding value in this story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps stories like mine reach those who might need to hear them most. When I walked out of my aunt and uncle's house that day, I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. The momentary satisfaction of seeing their shocked expressions quickly gave way to a complicated heaviness. I'd spent years imagining this moment, yet the reality left me questioning my motivations. I drove to my apartment, yes, the same modest rental I'd lived in for years, not because I couldn't afford better, but because its simplicity kept me grounded. The building was quiet that Sunday afternoon as I climbed the stairs to the third floor, each step echoing with memories of climbing these same stairs after double shifts, my legs aching, my mind racing with business ideas. My phone began ringing before I even closed my apartment door. Winston, then Phoebe, then my aunt. I silenced each call, knowing that anything said in the heat of that moment would only escalate tensions. Instead, I opened my laptop and began drafting an email, explaining the situation more thoroughly, their options, the timeline, the legal realities. As I typed, an unexpected memory surfaced. Winston, age 12, sneaking into my room with half his Halloween candy because his parents had forbidden him from sharing with me after I'd failed to complete my chores. "They're being stupid," he'd whispered. "You're more my sister than Phoebe anyway." I paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Winston had been a child then, caught in the same dysfunctional family system but with the protection of being biological kin. Had I just punished him for his parents' behavior? Was I becoming what I despised? Someone who wielded financial power as a weapon? The questions lingered as I finished the email, attaching resources for affordable housing options and financial assistance programs. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't leave them without information. I'd had to find all those resources on my own at 18. I wouldn't inflict that same disorientation on them, regardless of our history. 3 days passed before anyone responded. It was Winston who broke the silence, requesting to meet at a neutral location, a park halfway between our homes. I agreed, curious about what he might say separate from his parents' influence. The park was alive with early summer energy, children climbing on playsets, couples walking dogs, elderly people feeding ducks at the small pond. Winston sat on a bench near the water, looking older than his 30 years. I sat beside him, leaving space between us. "I didn't know," he said immediately, "about how they treated you. Not really. I mean, I saw differences, but they always explained them away. Said you had different needs. Said your parents left specific instructions." I stared at him, processing his words. "Specific instructions? From my parents?" Winston nodded, gaze fixed on the pond. "They told us your parents left a letter asking them to raise you differently, more practically than us. To prepare you for a life without inheritance or privilege." He finally looked at me. I never saw the letter. I just believed them. A wave of pure fury washed through me. My parents never wrote such a letter. They died unexpectedly on a weekend sailing trip. There was no premonition, no preparations. Winston's expression crumpled. I had a feeling, especially after college, when I saw how other families treated adopted or guardian children. But it was easier to believe them than confront the alternative. The alternative being that your parents systematically mistreated an orphan child while pretending it was for my own good. He flinched but didn't argue. "They're not handling this well, Avalora. Dad's talking about contesting the purchase legally. Mom's telling everyone you've had a psychotic break. Phoebe's furious because she was counting on inheriting that house someday." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Inheriting a house that was underwater financially? They've been living beyond their means for decades. "I know that now." Winston ran a hand through his hair. "Dad lost his position at the investment firm 3 years ago. They gave him a settlement package, but it's nearly gone. He's been working contract jobs while pretending he's still employed full-time. The house was remortgaged twice to cover expenses. This information wasn't surprising, but hearing it confirmed sent an unexpected pang through me. The image I'd held of my aunt and uncle, financially secure but cruel, shifted slightly. They were still cruel, but their cruelty might have stemmed partly from their own financial anxiety. It didn't excuse their behavior, but it contextualized it. "What do you want from me, Winston?" "Time," he answered immediately. "Not for them, for me. I've been living in their guest room since my divorce last year. I need a few months to find a place and get back on my feet." I studied him, looking for manipulation but finding only honest vulnerability. "I'll consider it, but I need something from you first." "Name it." "That notebook my aunt kept, the one where she tracked every expense related to me. I want it." Winston's brow furrowed. "Her accounting book? She still has it. Keeps it in her desk drawer like some kind of twisted heirloom." "Get it for me. Then we'll talk about extending the timeline." He agreed, and we parted with an awkward handshake that neither of us knew how to navigate into something more familiar. As I walked back to my car, I felt the first stirrings of a revised plan. The eviction would proceed, but perhaps with more strategic precision than blanket punishment. The following week brought a barrage of communications. My uncle's attorney sent a letter challenging the purchase on technical grounds, all easily dismissed by my legal team. My aunt called mutual acquaintances, spreading stories about my mental instability and unhealthy obsession with their family. Phoebe posted a thinly veiled social media rant about fake family who stab you in the back when you least expect it. I weathered it all with a calmness that surprised even me. Their reactions, entitled "defensive, externalizing blame," only confirmed I'd made the right decision. 10 days after our meeting, Winston texted me, "Got it, plus something else you should see." We met at a quiet cafe this time. He slid a canvas bag across the table. Inside was the familiar notebook, burgundy cover now faded, pages yellowed with age, and a sealed envelope that looked decades old. "What's this?" I asked, lifting the envelope. "I found it tucked inside the notebook. It's addressed to you, in handwriting I didn't recognize." My heart stuttered as I examined the envelope. Avalora was written across the front in my mother's distinctive script, elegant cursive with an unusual way of crossing the L that I'd tried to imitate as a child. "Where did you find this exactly?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. "It was stuck between pages in the middle of the book. I only found it because I was flipping through to see what kind of records she kept." With trembling fingers, I carefully opened the sealed envelope. Inside was a single sheet of stationery I immediately recognized, the pale blue paper my mother had used for special correspondence. The letter was dated 2 weeks before their deaths. "Dear Avalora, if you're reading this, something has happened to your father and me. I pray this letter never reaches you, that we'll laugh about my unnecessary precautions years from now. But sailing can be unpredictable, and your father always says, proper preparation prevents poor performance. First and most important, we love you beyond measure. You are the joy of our lives, our greatest achievement, our continuing legacy. Second, we've made financial provisions for you. There's an education trust managed by Terrence Beaumont at First Maritime Trust. This should cover your schooling through university. Additionally, we've established a separate trust to activate on your 25th birthday, giving you time to develop your own relationship with money before receiving your inheritance. If Marceline and Dominic are caring for you as we've requested, please know we've arranged compensation for them. They should receive quarterly payments to cover your expenses. These funds are separate from your trusts and are intended to ensure you're never a financial burden. Grow strong, stay curious, and remember that kindness matters more than achievement. We'll love you always, wherever we are. Mom and Dad. I read the letter 3 times, each word carving new wounds. There had been trusts, there had been quarterly payments, there had been explicit instructions that I should never feel like a financial burden. And my aunt and uncle had concealed it all. "Avalora?" Winston's voice broke through my shock. "What is it?" I handed him the letter wordlessly, then opened the accounting notebook while he read. The early pages were familiar. itemized expenses for my care. But as I flipped further, I discovered entries I'd never seen before. Trust payment received, $4,500. Trust payment received, $4,500. Trust payment received, $4,500. Quarter after quarter, year after year, payments received but never used for their intended purpose. By my quick calculation, they had received over $180,000 designated specifically for my care and education. Money that had instead funded family vacations I wasn't invited on, private schools for their children while I attended underfunded public schools, home renovations while I slept in a converted storage room. When Winston finished reading the letter, he looked physically ill. I had no idea. Neither did I. My voice was calm despite the storm raging inside me. They didn't just treat me poorly, Winston. They stole from me. They hijacked my future. He placed the letter carefully on the table between us. What are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? The eviction now seemed almost trivial compared to this revelation. This wasn't just about petty family cruelty anymore. This was fraud, theft, possibly criminal behavior. I need time to think, I said finally, and I need to contact this Terrence Beaumont if he's still alive. Winston nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not just for what they did, but for never questioning the story they told us. As I gathered the notebook and letter, a new clarity settled over me. The eviction would proceed, but it would now be just one component of a more comprehensive reckoning. Terrence Beaumont was indeed still alive, retired from First Maritime Trust, but sharp as ever at 79. When I called the bank, they connected me with his successor, who, after verifying my identity, provided his contact information with the comment, "He'll be relieved to hear from you. He tried to locate you for years." Our meeting took place at his home, a modest house overlooking a small lake. Age had bent his tall frame, but his eyes were alert and evaluating as he invited me inside. "You look remarkably like your mother," he said as we settled in his study. Same determined expression. I'd brought the letter, which he examined with a heavy sigh. "I suspected something was wrong when your aunt and uncle refused to bring you to meetings. Banking regulations were different then. Without evidence of misconduct, I couldn't intervene directly." "What happened to the trusts?" I asked. He explained in methodical detail. The quarterly payments had continued until I turned 18, at which point my aunt and uncle had presented documentation, forged. We now realized, claiming I'd chosen to relinquish my educational trust to support their children's education instead. The educational trust was fully depleted by the time I realized something was amiss, Terrence admitted. But the second trust, the inheritance meant to activate at 25, required your in-person signature and identity verification. When you never appeared to claim it, I placed administrative holds to protect the assets. My heart pounded. "Are you saying that trust still exists?" "Indeed, and it's grown considerably over the years. Your parents were savvy investors, and the portfolio has been well managed. The current value is approximately $4.7 million. The figure struck me like a physical blow. All those years of struggle, working multiple jobs, taking on student debt, living in substandard housing. Meanwhile, millions had been waiting for me, money my aunt and uncle had tried to access but couldn't. "I'll need to verify your identity formally, of course," Terrence continued. "But once that's complete, the funds can be transferred to accounts of your choosing." I left his home with a thick folder of documents and a spinning mind. The inheritance itself was almost secondary to the confirmation of what I'd always sensed. My parents had loved me, had provided for me, had wanted me to feel secure and valued. Everything my aunt and uncle had implied about being an unwanted burden had been a lie constructed to justify their exploitation. That night, I made a series of decisions that would permanently alter my family's understanding of consequences. First, I contacted my attorney to initiate fraud investigations against my aunt and uncle. Second, I hired a forensic accountant to trace every misappropriated penny from my educational trust. Third, I modified the eviction timeline, not to extend it, but to accelerate it. They would have 30 days, not 60. The next morning, I received a call from my aunt. the first direct contact since I'd delivered the eviction notice. Her voice dripped with the artificial sweetness I remembered from childhood, when she'd put on performances of caring guardianship for outsiders. Avalora, darling, we need to talk about this misunderstanding. Dominic and I have always wanted what's best for you. I found the letter, I replied simply, from my parents, and I've spoken with Terence Beaumont. The silence that followed contained multitudes. Fear, calculation, the first dawning realization that this situation had escalated beyond her control. Whatever you think you know, she began. Stop. I know about the quarterly payments. I know about the educational trust you depleted. I know about the inheritance you tried and failed to access. Another silence, then a dramatic shift in tone. You ungrateful little after everything we did for you, taking you in when no one else would, feeding and clothing you. With money specifically provided for those purposes, I countered. Money you documented in your little notebook while pretending I was a financial drain. We deserved compensation for disrupting our lives. Do you think it was easy, suddenly having another child thrust upon us? There it was, the truth she'd always hidden behind performative guardianship. I'd been an unwelcome obligation, even with financial incentives. The eviction timeline has changed, I informed her. You now have 30 days, not 60. Additionally, you'll be receiving formal notice of legal proceedings regarding the misappropriated trust funds. You can't do this to family. Her voice had risen to a desperate pitch. You established the rules of our relationship long ago, I replied. I'm simply operating within the parameters you created. I ended the call and blocked her number, then did the same for my uncle and Phoebe. Winston was the only one I kept an open line to, partly because of his apparent ignorance of his parents' actions, and partly because I needed someone to communicate the changing timeline. The following weeks unfolded with the precision of well-laid plans. My legal team delivered updated eviction notices and initiated proceedings regarding the misappropriated educational trust. The forensic accountant traced payments through family accounts, revealing patterns of fraud extending beyond my situation, including tax evasion and mortgage application misrepresentations. Winston kept me informed of the family's reactions. My uncle, facing potential criminal charges, had grown despondent. My aunt vacillated between rage and panic attacks. Phoebe had fled to a friend's house, refusing to help her parents pack or plan. They're not just losing the house, Winston told me during one of our now regular coffee meetings. They're losing everything they thought defined them. Their social standing. Their illusion of financial stability. The story they told themselves about who they are. I nodded, understanding completely. That's exactly what they took from me. My story, my security, my rightful place in the world. The day before the eviction deadline, I received an unexpected email from Phoebe, a rambling message alternating between accusations and pleas. The final paragraph caught my attention. They kept things from your parents' house. Items they told me were worthless that they were going to throw away. But I saw Mom looking at them sometimes. They're in boxes in the attic labeled kitchen supplies. I thought you should know. 24 hours later, as my aunt and uncle loaded the last of their possessions into a moving truck bound for my uncle's sister's house 3 states away, I arrived with Winston to inspect the property. They avoided eye contact as they handed over the keys, their formerly proud postures now bent with the weight of exposure. The house felt different without their presence, larger, lighter somehow. Winston led me to the attic access in the hallway ceiling. I'll help you look, he offered. The boxes labeled kitchen supplies were tucked behind holiday decorations and outgrown children's clothes. Inside, wrapped in old towels and newspapers dated from the year my parents died, were the physical remnants of my previous life. Photo albums, my mother's jewelry box, my father's collection of vintage nautical maps, a handmade quilt my grandmother had created for my birth. And at the bottom of the final box, a small jewelry case containing my mother's engagement ring, an unusual design with a blue sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. I remembered playing with it as a child, how she'd let me try it on and pretend to be a grown-up. She wore this every day, I whispered, sliding it onto my finger where it fit perfectly. They told me all her jewelry was lost in the accident. Winston watched silently as I gathered these treasures, these pieces of my identity they'd hidden away while pretending to be my benefactors. As we carried the boxes downstairs, he finally spoke. What happens now? To them, I mean. I paused on the landing, considering the question. The legal consequences would unfold regardless of my personal feelings. The fraud investigation had already been filed with authorities. The financial reckoning would come through official channels. But there was something else I could offer, something that would honor my parents' values while acknowledging my own journey. Do you remember what my mother wrote in her letter? That kindness matters more than achievement? Winston nodded. I'm going to establish a foundation in my parents' names for children who've lost parents, to ensure they receive not just financial support but advocacy, someone checking that they're treated with dignity and respect. I continued down the stairs, my mother's ring catching the light from the windows, and I'm going to invite your parents to the launch event. Not because they deserve forgiveness, but because I want them to witness what actual guardianship should look like. Outside, the moving truck had departed. The house, my house now, stood silent, waiting for its next chapter. What about you? Winston asked as we loaded the boxes into my car. What do you want for yourself after all this? I smiled, feeling the weight of my mother's ring, not as a burden but as a connection, a reminder that I'd always been loved, always been provided for, even when that provision had been intercepted. I want what my parents wanted for me, to grow strong, stay curious, and remember that kindness matters. I closed the car door and looked back at the house. And I want to finally stop renting and create a real home.